What's up, guys? Here are my predictions for a UFC fight night happening in Milwaukee, Wisconsin this Saturday. It looks like a solid card, nothing too crazy, nothing really bad about the card, and some really fun fights actually, especially toward the top. But we're going to start with Bobby Green versus Drakkar Klose. This fight can be your fight of the night. Both fighters very well-rounded, although Bobby Green is more well-rounded defensively, whereas Drakkar Klose does everything in the book pretty much. And Bobby Green, although he has pretty good takedown defense, he's very explosive, very good sprawling ability, and really good at fighting the hands of the opponent, he loves to take a boxing approach, right? And this leaves him vulnerable in some areas, even in the boxing exchanges. Bobby Green takes the Philly shell style, shoulder rolls with punches, tries to roll and move with the punches, a very traditional boxing approach. This is harder to do in MMA than it is in boxing because of the smaller gloves. You're able to land shots and openings that the bigger gloves will be able to deflect. And a perfect example of this was Lando Vannata versus Bobby Green, where Green was trying to shoulder roll the punch, especially that right hand of Vannata, but Vannata was able to land over the shoulder and drop Green, where if Vannata had the bigger boxing glove, it probably would have bounced or deflected off the shoulder a little bit on its way in. And he does switch stances, so the target changes for his opponent. But other than that, Bobby Green has good power, very explosive hands, good hook, good timing on his left hook especially. He has a pretty good timing on his straight right hand as well. And what he brings to this fight is a lot of experience. Drakkar Klose, on the other hand, is more, like I said, more well-rounded offensively. He'll throw leg kicks, and he's really good at takedowns. He has pretty good power in his hands as well, and he keeps a pretty high pace on the opponent with a lot of pressure. Now, Bobby Green's defense of shoulder rolling and just utilizing traditional boxing defense leaves his legs and hips exposed, right? Even though he's really quick to sprawl and really quick to defend the takedowns, leg kick's going to be a big weapon for Drakkar Klose. Like you saw in his fight with Mcgeary doesn't check leg kicks a whole lot either, and Drakkar Klose is able to land those calf leg kicks, and I believe he's going to be able to do the same on Bobby Green. So for this fight, I'm going to go with Drakkar Klose. I think he has many more weapons on the feet. He can change levels whenever he wants, so he can box with Bobby Green a little bit if Bobby Green tries to counter him with the right hand or the check left hook, depends what stance he takes. Klose can dive in for a takedown right from there, or he can attack from a distance, where Bobby Green's going to have a little bit of a hard time. So I'm going to go with Drakkar Klose. I'm going to go by a third round TKO, but I can see a decision because Green is very tough, but I think the leg kick's going to be a deciding factor in this fight. Then we go to Jim Miller versus Charles Oliveira. A battle of very dangerous, slick grapplers, really good submissions from both these guys, but different styles. Jim Miller's a lot more composed and controlled, where Oliveira will risk positions every single time, but he is very precise and accurate on strangling his opponents. But we have seen him in the past give up important positions because of it. Now, the biggest thing to note about this fight, immediately looking at it, is Jim Miller has fought at 155 for most of his career, pretty much all of his career. And Charles Oliveira has fought at 145 for much of his career. But Oliveira is clearly the bigger fighter in this one, being 2 inches taller, 3-inch reach advantage, and just looks bigger in general. Now, when you look at this fight, usually when you look at two grapplers fighting each other, it can become a striking match, or it can become a crazy grappling match. If it stays striking, I think Charles Oliveira is going to dominate this fight. Jim Miller, he isn't doing so well in his career lately. He has been fighting forever. I mean, he has experience. Oliveira has experience as well, but Jim Miller has fought some of the best lightweights in the world, and his striking ability has just, I don't want to say decaying, but it's not living up to the evolution, right? It's not evolving like everybody else's. And it's very much true when he's going to be fighting someone like Oliveira, whose striking has been getting better, especially going up to 155, where he's a lot healthier. You know, Miller's shots are a lot more labored. They're a little bit more forced. He does have some snap in his right hand. He has pretty good low kicks here and there. But Oliveira, being the taller fighter, he's going to have the knee against Jim Miller whenever Miller tries to go for a takedown. His jab is very precise. His straight right hand is very precise. His head kicks are all going to be there. And Miller's defense is a little bit too obvious. Now, the only thing is Jim Miller is going to have to go for takedowns in this fight, because Oliveira, although he is very dangerous on the ground, and he did submit guys like Clay Guida of all people, who has amazing submission defense, who is a very similar build to Jim Miller, as well as being a grappler. Oliveira has given up positions, like I said before, but if he could snatch onto that guillotine, which is one of his go-to submissions, especially on wrestlers, it could be a very short night. So at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. I think he has more weapons. He's better in more aspects of MMA. It just depends where his fight IQ is, what his decision-making is going to be like. So I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. I'm going to go by a second-round submission. Then we go to Rob Font versus Sergio Pettis. Now, this is a very interesting fight where Sergio Pettis is coming back up to 135 from 125. and he's going to be the smaller fighter. That's the first thing to take note. It's going to be pretty obvious in there. Rob Font is actually a pretty good sized bantamweight, and both these guys are strikers, but Sergio Pettis, I believe, has a better ground game. And Rob Font doesn't really have amazing takedown defense, so that's automatically a big weapon and a big advantage for Sergio Pettis. If it ever gets dicey on the feet, which it absolutely can, he could try to go for takedowns and work that game to get Rob Font thinking about the takedowns, and now striking can open up if the takedowns aren't being super successful, and now he can mix up the game. Rob Font, though, he's more of a boxer than anything. He's one of the best boxers in this division. Very long punches, very good jab, left hook. Uppercuts are on point. His kicks are pretty good whenever he goes to them, but he's not going to be throwing too many kicks at Sergio Pettis. Pettis, I believe, trumps him at almost every kicking technique, and Pettis is going to be the faster fighter. That's another thing to take note. Pettis is more of a Taekwondo fighter, really good kicks, has pretty good punches, very much more controlled than his brother Anthony Pettis, throws things down the pipe, better takedown defense if it goes to that, which I highly doubt it will. But the thing about this fight is, Rob Font, even though he is pretty good with his kicks whenever he goes to him, he doesn't defend kicks. He doesn't defend leg kicks really well at all. Even Thomas Almeida, who Rob Font was able to knock out, whenever Almeida went for the leg kicks, Rob Font just took them. No answers to them at all, really. And I believe Sergio Pettis being a lot more methodical, I think he will target the legs of Rob Font, especially being a longer fighter with a long stance and boxing oriented. The leg kicks mixed up with a wrestling opportunity, as well as being faster than Rob Font to get in and out, I believe Sergio Pettis should win this fight. So I think it's pretty close, but I'm going to go Sergio Pettis in this one. I think he's going to win by a decision. If Sergio Pettis doesn't use leg kicks, I do favor Rob Font. And if they start exchanging with each other, I think Rob Font would win every single time. But using all of his weapons, I think Pettis should win the fight. Then we go to the co-main event, and a very, very exciting fight. Very important fight for the lightweight division. Edson Barboza versus Dan Hooker. A battle between two strikers, with one has really good takedown defense, and the other who has very slick submissions if it gets to the ground. Both knockout artists for the most part, but in different ways. Edson Barboza is more of a Muay Thai fighter with really good Taekwondo skills. Very good movement when it stays in the center of the octagon. Extremely fast. Going to be much faster than Dan Hooker, I believe, as well as the power might even go to Barboza's side. They are about the same size, it seems like. Dan Hooker making 145 was crazy. I don't know how he made that weight. I mean, he's a big 155er. But Barboza's more of a kicker, where Dan Hooker uses his hands a lot more, but really good with his knees. He has probably the most dangerous knee in this entire division. His timing on it is insane. Able to just throw it up there, moving backwards sometimes, and land it flush on the opponent. Moving forward like he did against Jim Miller, and it's just his timing. He just knows when to throw it. He just has the feeling of it, and he lands it almost every single time he throws it. But he usually lands it on shorter fighters who duck a lot more. So Ross Pearson being a much shorter fighter, Jim Miller also a much shorter fighter. Against a guy like Edson Barboza, who doesn't duck a lot, isn't short, and stays out of range, that knee, I don't think is going to be in play as much unless he hurts Barboza. But this match, I believe, is going to be a striking match. I can see Hooker trying to utilize some wrestling here and there just to mix up the game, because he does have a better grappling game, but Edson Barboza is not an easy guy to take down, and especially cover the distance to take him down. Now, that leaves to the most important thing in this entire fight, the range that these two guys are going to be fighting in. They both fight long range, and I know Dan Hooker has what it takes to win this fight, but his approach to Edson Barboza has to be different than he has fought pretty much anybody else. Because usually he's the longer fighter, and he stays on the outside, waits for the opponent, or just finds openings to come in. Against Barboza, he doesn't have that luxury. If he stays on the outside like he always does, I believe Barboza's going to pick at him and destroy his legs. Dan Hooker, sometimes he'll check leg kicks, sometimes he won't. And those leg kicks he's not checking sometimes are not even set up at all. And Edson Barboza is probably the best leg kicker in UFC history. And his switch kick to the body's there. He can set up head kicks. He has a very fast jab if Hooker tries to get in. Hooker, he does very well when he smothers opponents and when he finds his timing. He likes to feel it out a little bit. Like a perfect fight to watch Dan Hooker in is when he fought Mark Giacchese. A very fast, explosive striker with very dynamic and flexible kicks. And he took the first round off completely and stayed on the outside. Barboza's game is revolved around that. To this day, I have not seen anybody beat Barboza at that game. Staying on the outside at the center of the octagon and go back and forth with each other. He is probably the best fighter in the lightweight division doing that, and Dan Hooker likes to fight that game. But Dan Hooker, especially on his opponents in the lightweight division, for the most part, he was able to back them up because of the pressure, because of him just defending shots and walking behind them. Very dangerous to do that against a guy like Edson Barboza. Now, if it gets in close and Hooker's able to pressure Barboza safely and bypass some of those shots, I believe him smothering Barboza, landing elbows, landing short hooks, I think he will beat Barboza. That's what I'm saying. It depends how Dan Hooker comes out there. Because I don't think he will come out there like he usually does. If he does, I'm going to have to side with Edson Barboza. But if he changes the game a little bit, marches forward and pressures Barboza and uses boxing and stays in the mid to close range, he will probably win this fight. But looking at history, looking at their past fights, I'm going to have to go with Edson Barboza on this one. If I'm going to go with Dan Hooker, I'm going to have to bank on him utilizing that strategy, and he hasn't used that yet. So I'm going to go with Edson Barboza on this one. I'm going to go by a third round TKO. I can see a decision as well. If they stay at a range, I see him chopping down Hooker from a distance. If Hooker tries to come in after a lot of that damage, Edson Barboza's jab is lightning quick. His right overhand's very quick, and his movement, I believe, will give Hooker some fits, especially early in the fight. But then again, it just depends how Hooker comes out there. This fight is very hard to predict. Very doable for both fighters. Then we go to the main event, Kevin Lee versus Iaquinta 2, the rematch. In the first fight, Iaquinta was able to win a decision, even though he had some problems in that fight, especially on the ground with Kevin Lee. This fight is very different, for many reasons. Kevin Lee now, if you look back at that fight, Kevin Lee was a much smaller person in general. He is huge for lightweight now. And he was able to get Iaquinta to the ground and really threaten him with the rear naked choke. And now, Kevin Lee being a little bit older, have more experience, much better grappler, and much bigger than he was before, that advantage is going to be huge in this one. Iaquinta, of course, has been working on things. His takedown defense has gotten a lot better. But the thing that has really gotten better is his boxing with his distance management. Before their fight, Iaquinta did not have any knockouts in UFC. Now, he only had 3 fights prior to that, but even afterward, he lost by submission, and then he went on a 3-fight knockout streak, got a split decision with Jorge Masvidal, came back and knocked out Diego Sanchez in the first round. So he has been developing his striking. The form of his punches have been getting a lot better so he could generate the power through them. His right straight has really gotten powerful. His right overhand, he has a very good jab now. But Kevin Lee, since that fight, went on a 4-win streak, only 1 finish by submission against James Muntasri, who's a strict striker, lost by knockout against Leonardo Santos, and then that's when the grappling and the size of Kevin Lee started to really take effect in 2016, where he was dominating opponents with his wrestling. His boxing was getting a lot better, especially in his last fight against Edson Barboza. I mean, his punches have become so crisp. You're seeing a very different fighter than you saw when he fought Iaquinta almost 5 years ago. At 26 years old now, Kevin Lee is one of the elites of this division. And with the explosive wrestling style and the very slick and dangerous BJJ to go with it, especially his ability to get the back of the opponent as well as gain full mount, he's very good at passing guards. He was able to pass Tony Ferguson's guard. That is crazy. And it got into full mount of all places, while getting drained by a staph infection. That is so impressive. With a 77-inch reach and way better distance management, I'm going to have to go with Kevin Lee in this one. And I'm actually have to go by a 2nd round submission. Now, I think his distance management with his footwork is going to give Iaquinta with a 7-inch reach disadvantage a lot of problems on landing that right hand. And if Iaquinta is able to close in distance enough to land the right hand, I believe Kevin Lee's takedowns are going to be a little bit too much for Iaquinta to stuff, especially because of the strength and the explosiveness behind them. And then just glancing over the Bellator cards, because there's 2 of them, there's quite a bit of fights. I'm going to go through them really quickly. I do think Michael Chandler is going to dominate. I have him by 1st or 2nd round knockout. I still have to do more research on Frank Mir's opponent, but Frank Mir is really long in the tooth, so I don't know what to say really about that. Liam Mcgeary versus King Mo is pretty interesting. King Mo with the wrestling, heavy style, but doesn't really do anything else to threaten Liam Mcgeary. Liam Mcgeary is an underdog, and he definitely has a shot, especially King Mo is a bit older in his career. I think King Mo really only has an overhand right, a left hook if it gets in close, and the double leg. Whereas Liam Mcgeary has many more weapons. He has a knee which can really catch King Mo. Very slick submissions and a nasty left hook he's knocked out many people with. Very long too. So I'm going to side with Liam Mcgeary on that one. I'm going to go with the underdog by a 2nd round submission. And then Lyoto Machida versus Rafael Carvalho. If Lyoto shows up like the last time we saw him, at least, I think he should win the fight. I'll go by a 3rd round knockout. Naaman Gracie versus Ed Ruth. One of the best BJJ versus wrestling matchups you'll ever see in MMA. This can be a pretty close fight, but I'm going to have to go with Naaman Gracie on this one because I don't see where Ed Ruth can threaten Gracie. On the feet, I think it's pretty even. I don't think Ed Ruth wants to take Gracie to the ground because Gracie has all the submissions in his toolbox and he's very hard to get control of. And if Ruth stays in the guard, I'm pretty sure Naaman Gracie's going to catch onto something. His arm bars are amazing. His ability to get the back is amazing. His guillotines are going to be there. Everything's going to be there to threaten Ed Ruth. And even if he doesn't decide to take Gracie to the ground, Gracie's going to drive him for takedowns himself and possibly ride it out to a decision. So I'm going to have to go with Gracie in that one. I'm going to go by a third round submission. Now let's look at the betting odds to see if there's anything interesting. Trevor Smith being a 2.5 to 1 underdog against Zach Cummings. I think it's almost like a pick'em fight. I think they both have a very good chance of winning that fight. Joaquim Silva is actually an underdog. That's interesting. Against Jared Gordon. Joaquim Silva is a dangerous threat. Jessica Rose Clark is a 2 to 1 underdog. Andrea Lee is no joke, and she's very strong, but I think Jessica Rose Clark on the ground, she's a little bit more crafty, where Lee can utilize a lot of her strength advantage. I think it's a pretty close fight. I think Lee will win, but almost a 3 to 1 favorite, 2.5 to 1 favorite. I don't know if I agree with that. So there's some chance for Rose Clark in that one. Sergio Pettis is the underdog. I think he probably will win that fight, but it's a very close fight to call. Other than that, I agree with all the fights. And on the Bellator cards, Lee Mcgeary definitely has a big shot at finishing King Mo. I don't think he'll dominate the fight, but I think he can catch King Mo at many turns. Lyoto Machida is an underdog, and if he shows up like he did against even Vitor Belfort, I think he'll win the fight. Ed Ruth is a 4 to 1 favorite. That is crazy, man. That is the craziest one this weekend. He can win, but I see Gracie having more ways to win that fight. I don't know what they're looking at. I don't know if they're looking at Ed Ruth somehow has this amazing striking ability over Gracie, or his wrestling so dominant, but what can he do on top? That's the thing. What can he do on top that Gracie's never seen before? That's crazy. So I hope you guys enjoyed the predictions, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe. My next video is going to be a breakdown on John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson 1, getting prepared for the rematch. So be on the lookout for that. It might come out tomorrow, Saturday, maybe even Sunday. So be on the lookout for that. And then I'm going to make a breakdown on one of the fights this weekend. So be on the lookout for that as well. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.